Good evening, everyone. We are meeting via Zoom with the District Advisory Building Committee. Today is Tuesday, July 13th, 2021. I'll take a quick roll call. Brad Post.
Here.
Matthew Winch. Okay.
Here.
Abigail Fuller. And Abigail did let me know that she's under the weather this evening. Paul Stevens. He also was going to try and join us. Okay. Jay Norris.
Here.
Thank you. Jess Marino.
Here.
Board Member Russell Better.
Here.
Board Member Figdor.
Here.
Okay. Councillor Dion and Councillor Ray both will not be joining us this evening. Councillor Dion, who is my co-chair, has a Health and Human Services meeting, as does Councillor Ray. Councillor Ray sent her comments along to me, which I'll read as we go, as did Mr. Stevens if he doesn't end up joining us. So thank you everyone for being here for this short notice on this very important meeting. I wanted to just do a few quick housekeeping things. First and foremost, this is a special meeting of the DABC to review the bids that came in for Reiki, the under budget funds, the usage of those, and the over budget for Presumpscot. And the superintendent is going to frame up the conversation in a moment. The DABC will come away tonight with a recommendation, hopefully, that we will then present to the board at our upcoming special meeting, which that date is to be determined. Hopefully we'll know very soon. After the DABC members have asked questions from the presentation and prior to the DABC deciding on a recommendation, we wanted to give the opportunity to any BLAC members from any of the schools on the call that may like to ask a question that has not yet been answered. And so we are going to use, for everybody on the DABC, as well as those that may be in the audience that would like to speak, the raise the hand function, and I will watch for hands to call on you. So if we could all just use that. We're going to stop at the end of each slide for any questions. And if no one raises their hand, we're going to keep moving. But we want to make sure that everything is covered to everyone's comfort. And as I said, I'll share Councillor Ray's thoughts as well as any from Mr. Stevens that he provided in case he does not make the call. So I want to, first and foremost, before we turn it over to the superintendent, have the CHA members, introduce yourselves and let them know what CHA is and what your function is amongst all of us. Starting with Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Jolly. I'm with CHA. We're the owner's project manager for Portland Public Schools, and I'm a project manager.
Thank you. Jeffrey?
Jeff Birnbaum with oh, there's a little bit of feedback. Jeff Birnbaum with CHA. I'm the project executive on the project, working with Ben and Laura, and as owner project representatives, our job is to look at the construction schedule and quality and help drive these projects to completion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And Ben?
Good evening, everyone. Ben Mitchell, I'm with CHA as well. Assistant project manager with Laura and Jeff as owner's representative.
Great. And also joining us this evening is Superintendent Batana, as well as Steve Stilfen, our Executive Director of Operations, Mark Lee from Harriman Architects, and see who else we have here. I think we have Mr. Sherwood, Doug Sherwood. I thought I saw him, but maybe not. And then there's a phone number, which I'm not sure if the person who is 802-595-1525, could you identify yourself?
Okay. I think that may be Lisa, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Lisa from your?
Correct.
Okay. And then we have Emily Watt as well from Harriman Architects with us this evening. Hi, Emily. So with that, Lisa, is that you, 802?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Thank you. All righty. and we have Doug Sherwood joining us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent to frame up the conversation, and then we'll be off.
Thank you, Sarah. And I also want to thank everyone for joining us today on short notice. I know many of you also joined us last week for the meeting with the school board, the workshop that was the precursor for having this meeting today. So this is not completely new and foreign to all of you, but it may be to some. And so I thought it would be helpful to do a little bit of a rewind into how we got to the need for this meeting, and also then to frame up what we are doing today. So, as you know, we have for a while now been on this course with 3 school projects. We made some deliberate decisions that, the DABC was party to around trying to stagger those bids based on on our best understanding of what the market would look like and things along those lines. And, we got to the last project in really good shape, with the Longfellow project coming in very close to on budget, and the Reiki project coming in significantly below what was budgeted. And we had on Thursday, I believe it was the 21st, we had our bids come in for Presumpscot significantly above where our budget was. So we walked through a lot of that with the school board and the DABC members who were able to join us last Tuesday, and laid out, so what are the implications of that? And so today is the next step in making some decisions around what it is that what we will do going forward, given where we are. So what we've asked Harriman to do for us today is to do sort of a look back through the history of this project, to specifically the budget element of it. So to give everyone a clear understanding of how we got to where we are. We will go all the way back to what was originally envisioned, the changes that were made in the overall scope, the decisions that this group helped us to make around which of the different approaches to the renovations we would use, and then look at that at a very discrete level at each of the schools, so that you have all of that background information. We'll do a little bit of looking at in these last 2 set of bids, the Reiki bid and the Presumpscot bid, where the divergence between what was estimated and what was actually bid, where the deltas are, to give you a better understanding of the context in which these bids varied from what was budgeted. We'll take a minute to also look at all of the different alternates that were not actually included in the final bids as required elements, but all of which have been priced out. And the reason for that is because as we get into the options today, the extent to which we enlarge the investment that we're willing to make around Presumpscot, I want it to be very clear that that will limit our ability to do those alternates. So that's the main reason that it's important for everyone to have in front of them what are all of the things that we will not be able to do by moving a significant amount of money to the Presumpscot project. And then ultimately looking at what we think the options are for the Presumpscot project, which really fall into two realms. One is to move the money, which is in essence the money that we were able to save on the lower bid for Reiki, move that money to support the Presumpscot project as it came in from bid, or to make changes to the scope of the Presumpscot project, whether those are relatively small tweaks that would be more in the value engineering, but with our commitment to the current low bidder, or more significant changes which would require a postponement of the start of the Presumpscot project. So ultimately what we're hoping to get from you today is direction that will then be taken up by the school board at its next meeting that we have not, as Chair Thompson mentioned, we have not yet set, but we would expect, depending on the decision that you make, there's more or less urgency for that meeting to occur. But if so, what we hope is that you will have that direction for the school board coming out of your deliberations today. So I wanted to do a little bit of that sort of overview of the agenda. As Chair Thompson said, we're going to pause at the end of each of these slides to make sure that if you have any clarifying questions, you can ask them before we move on to the next one. We will not enter into a discussion of our preferences. I would like to do this, or I would like to do that, until we get through the entire presentation. The very end is where we have the place for those deliberations around those choices that I just outlined. So before we move on, any clarifications or clarifying questions around what we're asking you to do today? And Chair, I'm assuming you would want people to raise their hand using the raise your hand feature. Yeah. And then
I'm not seeing anybody at the moment.
All right.
I think we're good to go.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Lee from Harriman. Mark, thank you for the work that you and your team have done to sort of do this look back and to help tee up our conversation today. And so just make sure that at the end of each slide you pause and give people a chance to ask questions. We sometimes get rolling and don't do that, and we want to be very meticulous about that today.
Good. Thank you very much, Superintendent Platana. So I will I'll also keep my eyes on the screen here to see if a hand is raised. But as the superintendent's already reviewed the agenda and these major topic areas, and the first one is a review of the scope history. And so looking back to when we first realized that we wouldn't be able to accomplish all of the desired goals of either the original BFOF or the LICET scope, the decision making to come up with an alternate scope was deliberated. And in this slide identifies the time frame at which we went through and made those decisions. And the approximate values of the different scopes as well. So we knew that we had the original budget that was established at the time of the referendum. We had the LICET scope that we had priced out at the very beginning of it. And then in February, we updated the budget to look at the LICET scope and what that would look like. Later that month, we came up with alternatives. So we had classroom scenario 1, the separate gyms scenario 2, and the renovate gym, add cafeteria scenario 3. knowing that, again, that we had to make some decisions, and that it was sort of a series of different options that would utilize the bond funds in different ways. The scenario 1A was then a result of comments from the ABC meeting, and that was represented as on March 31st as scenario 1A classrooms or scenario 1B classrooms, and ultimately scenario 1A was chosen, which had sort of the spirit of the classrooms, and that was developed through consultation with the administration from each of the schools. And at that time, we still were projecting about a $600,000 overage for the total project budget. And that actually carried forward. So that used all the reserves and actually had about a $600,000 delta between the budget and what the estimate of the different budgets or the different costs would be. That ultimately was resolved when we rebalanced the budgets later in this year, a few months back in May.
Matthew Lynch?
Mark, I'm just curious. I was trying to piece it all together in my head, and there's not a great running history of this conversation in our past presentations from late last year to early this year. There was a point in time, and did scenario 1A include the Cafeteria Addition off the back of the building? And if not, can you remind us when that came in and when it subsequently came back out? I know I've got a general sense of that, but I think it's worth noting that that piece was in the scope and then it was back out of the scope more as an alternate after your final estimate.
Yeah, Matt, thank you. So the original scope in the spirit of the classrooms did not have the cafeteria kitchen at Longfellow. That was through conversations with the administration that suggested that instead the option was you could either do an addition to add functions onto the school, but we didn't have enough to do the full abatement and renovation of all the interior classrooms at Longfellow and do the addition. And so the feedback from the administration was it was more important to do the full renovation of the classrooms. And the challenge, as we'll recall with Longfellow, is that we couldn't do a partial abatement. It's not like we could do some degree of abatement and upgrade the classrooms to a limited amount. We had to take out the flooring and ceilings in the classrooms, which would result in us having to make a full investment in the classrooms. And that's why the budget at Longfellow precluded doing both, doing the addition onto the back and doing the full classroom renovations. After,
can I add something to that, Mark? I think this is what Matthew is recalling. The original classrooms scope did include that, and it was when we re-estimated the cost of the Longfellow project that stood out as something that brought us well over what we had budgeted for the project.
There's, yeah, and just following up on one additional component to that, there was at one point in the estimate, I think it was a schematic design estimate, we estimated that the amount of the abatement was less than what was originally budgeted or estimated. And so we knew that there was potentially some amount of money that we were hopeful would cover additional scope outside of the building. And so I think that's when we determined to put it in as an alternate. And we started showing some plans that identified how we would add it on to the building. And so it was identified at that time, and then carried as an alternate.
Yeah, and I was just trying to draw the distinction. I think there was a point in time, and it may have only been a meeting or two, that asbestos remediation money seemed to open the door more broadly. My recollection was it was more broadly accepted that it was achievable within the scope of work, and then it was right around bid time that it was sort of shifted into an alternate listing. I just wanted clarification on that, because that's my recollection of it, that it was at a point in time, late December of last year, early January, within reach of the Longfellow target budget, and then subsequently in a late January or late February meeting that unfortunately reversed itself with the asbestos money seemingly growing again. So I just really feel like that needs to be clarified as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There was between estimates, we started when the estimate identified that there was potentially less cost on the abatement. We then looked at what would it look like to add that on, and started seeing some plans that showed the configuration of that. When it was re-estimated, we understood that we would have to identify it as an alternate. So.
Are you all set, Matthew? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Moving over to Board Member Figdor.
Thank you. I just wanted to refresh my memory as well. When you said that the administration was focused on the remediation, prioritizing the remediation, I just want to clarify that my understanding was that was coming from the principal and folks at the school, not the superintendent and his direct team.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I was speaking of the school, the school principal. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, go ahead, Mark.
So the going back a bit further and just identifying what the original BFOF scope was and what the LICES scope was, we remember that the original BFOF had a significant more of upgrades to systems, and in particular mechanical systems, and the upgrade of the exterior envelope of the buildings. And so that's as we've looked at, and in addition to that, some work around the sites. Those are the areas that we removed from the LICES scope, and still tried to maintain as much of the opportunity to upgrade the educational spaces as well as necessary code upgrades to the buildings.
Okay, seeing no questions, keep going.
So this again goes back looking at the scope in February 2020, where Longfellow, at that time, we're looking at the addition for art and music in pre-K, abatement, secure entry, elevator, and miscellaneous upgrades. So at that time, again, we were considering that the expansion would potentially cover for art and music. And then Presumpscot would have classroom additions to replace the portables, the secure main entrance and administration area, and then the miscellaneous upgrades to the building. And at Reiki would be renovate the interior of the building, no or limited work on the community side, with the exception of miscellaneous code upgrades that would be required throughout the entire building. So this was the classroom scenario one, before we further developed additional options.
Okay, no questions. Okay, thank you.
After the March, as I stated in the previous slide, after the March meeting, per the direction of the DABC, chairman and facility staff were to work or to meet with the various school principals to understand what their priorities would be. We met with Principal Young and and again, this slide recaps like what we've already mentioned, by performing the abatement of the whole school would really eat up a lot of the funds. So I had to consider whether to do the interior work and abate the hazardous materials at Longfellow, or add additional program space. He believed that families would be supportive of scenario 1A. And if they went with that scenario, any money left over should be spent on getting the learning spaces out of the basement. And then there's subsequent follow-up with staff.
Okay, Jess Marino.
I just wanted to follow up. This is similar to what Matt said, just that looking at these slides, it seems it's curious to me that the history of this project ends in March 2020. There seems to be a focus in this presentation on where Longfellow ended in March of 2020. There was, the Cafeteria Addition was added shortly after March of 2020 and was in the plan for almost a year until several days before it went out to bid. I think this, this comes from my concern at the board meeting last week, where there were comments suggesting that the cafeteria had been deprioritized by the DABC. So I just, in the interest of transparency for the public who are watching, I think it's important to note that the DABC was never the one to recommend taking that out of the scope of the project, that this was a staff and school administrator recommendation, that it was put back in because of DABC discussion, that it was taken back out a few days before it went back to bid, that it is now listed as an alternate, and is the only project that went out to bid without a separate gym and cafeteria. And that's history that I think is important as we discuss this extra money that's going to be spent somewhere. Just in full disclosure, that everybody knows that the Longfellow project currently does not have a separate gym and cafeteria as it stands right now. So that, and I wish that this presentation didn't, for some reason, the budget history did not end in March 2020 with the classroom plan, because that's not what we've talked about for the past 15 months.
Thank you, Jess, for the clarification. Any further questions on this at the moment? Okay, seeing none, Mark, go ahead.
So the reason that this slide again identifies the departing point of finalizing for our design purposes what we were going to move forward with for scope of work is one of the important things that we have to do, is have a clear understanding of what the scope is before we go too far on the design. So we're not redesigning once we get down the road. And so 1A revised classroom scope was ultimately at Longfellow had included the secure entry, the abatement and renovation of existing classrooms with little or no reconfiguration, the elevator, miscellaneous upgrades to code and life safety, new bathroom and renovations to existing for ADA compliance, the electrical infrastructure, which included a new service. And so that was the scope at that point. And again, our deliberation point between January and March was to understand what the scope would be that we would proceed with the design. Presumpscot scope was classroom addition to replace portables, build a new cafeteria warming kitchen, the secure entrance, and miscellaneous upgrades to life safety and code. And the Reiki stayed as it was before, with renovations to the school side, secure entrance, and code upgrades throughout the building.
Thank you. Superintendent Batana?
Mark, I think it's also, to Jessica's earlier point, we're not showing on this slide where there was a build new cafeteria and warming kitchen in Longfellow at one point, so that's been noted. But here it pops up that there's a build new cafeteria and warming kitchen for Presumpscot, which wasn't in the previous scope. Can you just remind us how that came to pass?
Absolutely. And so I think I mentioned it again. I'll reiterate it, and hopefully it's sort of in a way that folks can understand our process. The deliberation in multiple meetings that we had with BLAC and mostly with DABC and the school board to arrive at what the scope would be to execute occurred between January and March. And so during that time, in the spirit of the classroom scenario was what was the directive of the DABC, and they directed the team, Harriman and PPS facility staff, to meet with the individual school leadership to understand what those priorities would be. That's ultimately what led to this slide right here, to this list. And so that's why there were a series of meetings, and at each one of those meetings, there were options that were presented, and that's what we've seen in the last several slides. This slide right here was the one where things settled, that it was agreed that this would be the priorities to move forward with for the designs of the schools. Does that, Superintendent Baton, does that answer that question or not?
Partially. I guess I'm still a little bit foggy on the, so this does not show that there was build new cafeteria and warming kitchen in the Longfellow scope at this time, but it was in the Longfellow scope at this time.
It was not.
Are you sure? Because I think that came out later when we re-estimated and found that there was not enough, that that the estimates came in higher for the for the abatement.
It is my understanding that it was not at this time because again, that was the ultimate question that we had to the principal. Are you interested in more addition or renovation of the classrooms? And
so then Jessica's recollection, which I share, that was a last minute decision right before this went out to bid.
There was an estimate that was done further in the design process that identified that we had savings from the abatement, as I mentioned to Mr. Winch's question. At that time, we were hopeful there would be enough to put in, but we hadn't re-estimated what the project would be with adding it back in. Further, so there are a series of meetings where we are showing it. In fact, the public presentations through the summer identified where it would be, but it was never estimated. And it was Harriman went back to say, we see some savings here. We're going to look at what it would look like to put it back in. Subsequent to that, we did have the final estimates done, identifying that we could not afford it in the project. And so we put it as an alternate to understand what the cost of it would be.
Yeah. I just wanted to be clear on that point. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Jess Marino?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that my notes are that in June of 2020, there was a redesign which included the cafeteria. And then I believe in March of 2021 is that when it went out to bid, we were represented with a design that did not have a cafeteria. And that was all based on cost estimates around the abatement, which were kind of, fuzzy, I think, all along. And so time-wise, that's, I guess, my concern, that these slides end March of 2020 because that all happened June 2020 to spring of 2021.
Thank you, Jess. Okay. Okay, so there's people that are in the attendees, and if you may have joined us later, we're going to, after the DABC asks all their questions, and if one of your questions isn't answered by the time we finish that, we are going to call on some people in the attendees that are on other BLA lists, excuse me, other BLA groups, but at this time we're not taking questions or comments from attendees. So thank you very much. Okay, go. Go ahead, Mark.
So the next item that we had started to look into was a deeper dive into the bid prices that were received for all three schools. And in particular, looking at Reiki and Presumpscot, as they showed significant anomalies from the budget for those two projects. The first one, we went back to ask the contractor, general contractor, Hardy Pond, to provide us a schedule of values. And so this is a divisional breakdown of cost and compare it with the estimate. And the items identified with the red rectangles are the ones that deviated significantly from the estimate. The challenge at this point in looking at those, it helps us identify perhaps where anomalies are in the bids, similar to what we had done with Lyseth when we first received that estimate or schedule values and compared it with the estimate. But the challenge is that there's a public process that we went through to arrive at these prices. And so while we can say that they deviate significantly from our estimates and we can ask for explanation, there's nothing that we require a contractor to change their price or to provide, I guess, a justification, if you will, of their pricing. We can certainly ask for a breakdown, but like I said, that's all we can do. Any change in the cost of the project has to be associated with a change in the scope of the work, and so what we did was, again, looked at those that deviated from our estimate by 10% or more, and those are identified in this slide. They were the ones that were under the estimated cost, and so there are others that deviate in different amounts, but these are the ones that were significant deviations.
Okay, seeing no questions, go ahead.
And then more recently, we looked at Presumpscot and the differences in those values, and there were 5 areas that differentiated significantly from the estimate for the work. We understand, and so those were or are steel, which has been noted, I think, publicly, the change in cost, the rising cost of steel and the delays in getting steel. That was one that was significantly over. And then the Division 9, which is identified as finishes, is really also includes drywall contractors, which is metal studs and drywall. And so that one was over, but not by a significant amount. Then we have plumbing and HVAC, and that's an area, electrical contractors and plumbing, mechanical contractors are areas right now where there are significant shortage of contractors that are available to do the work right now. And the information that we've been continuing to look at with a general contractor for this project, which is Great Falls Construction, they originally erred in saying that they had multiple bids for electrical and mechanical. They had a single bid for each of these. And so that's information that was shared after further conversation with them. And so we then asked for further breakdown. We've received a breakdown from the mechanical contractor this afternoon, but we haven't scoured that yet to understand how that compares with the estimate. Just right now, we've looked at this level to understand where the differences are. But the mechanical number is significantly more than what we envisioned it was going to be from our estimate, and as is the electrical number. The response that we did get from subcontractors are that they use the same process to arrive at their pricing that they have for all the schools that they bid. So Warren Mechanical, I think, bid all 3 schools, and Regional Electric, I know, bid on at least 2 of them. They are the low contractor on the Longfellow school, electrical contractor. So right now, that's about as much information as has been shared with us on those bids.
Thank you, Mark. Jeff?
Mark, just thank you. When was the estimate done?
At the end of the design development phase.
So last year.
Yeah, it
okay.
Carried an escalation value, understanding that there would be some price escalation, but likely looking at historical data and not looking at what we've witnessed in some of the price escalation.
Right. I will comment on Division 5, 9, and a little bit about 26. There has been, it's such a volatile market that the normal escalation, if you estimated last year to this year, I mean, steel, we're looking at 30, 35%. You know, wood went up about 30%. The futures of wood are leveling off and going down. So, and an electrical between copper wire and everything else, also 25 to 30% increase due to supply issues. So, if we were to take off 25 or 30% off of the delta, those numbers are a little bit more in line to your estimate. Just to show you that providing some reason behind that. HVAC, I don't. That delta is huge, so I have no comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Matthew?
Mark, you said something important there, that Warren Mechanical bid all 3 of the schools. That's correct?
That's my understanding.
But they were not low on all 3 schools.
Yeah, I'm not. I got to go back and look at who got the subcontracts for mechanical on the others. I don't have that off the top of my mind, but in conversation with them regarding the Presumpscot bid, they said they followed the same process that they did for the other schools.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking this is more to make a point, is if you knew who the low mechanicals were on Reiki and Longfellow, and if you knew what Warren Mechanical's numbers were on Reiki and Longfellow, if they were not in fact the low bidder, it would establish a pattern that suggests that, if I guess where I'm going with this is, was Warren Mechanical 66% higher on all 3 bids, but since they were the only bidder on this one, this is the one that they were awarded. And
yeah, I can look into that. Yeah, because
it paints a starkly different picture to me than one of, this is obviously it wasn't a competitive process because they were the only ones bidding it. But if they were $1.5 million over the low bidder on mechanical on the other 2 schools, then that raises more questions than answers.
Yeah, I think Matt, what we do know, and again I can go back and I'll verify for you whether they were low on the others, but what we do know is that we had a single mechanical bid on the Presumpscot project, certainly.
Yeah, no, and I understand that.
Mark, and you just mentioned you don't have those figures, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but with Lisa here, does she have that information?
Oh, in terms of who was the subcontractor for the others?
Yeah, could she look that up while you're presenting?
Emily might be able to, or if I get a pause, I can look. I think Lisa, I don't know if she's at a computer or not.
Okay. Well, since you have the speaking part. Okay. I'm going to go over to Jess Marino.
Hi, I'm just curious. So on the other bids that came in for Presumpscot, were they also very high in these areas? Because I think that would help me understand whether this is just a pattern like, yes, HVAC was high in every single bid that came in, or this was, or, you know, to Matt's point, that this was a very, very high bid for this.
Yeah, Jessica, and we don't, I don't know. We didn't ask the other contractors, the other two contractors that submitted prices for Presumpscot. We did not ask them for a schedule of values breakdown. We do know that there was a challenge in getting contractors to bid, but that mechanical and electrical, I think, were our two trades that are difficult to bid. The other general contractors' prices were above Great Falls' number. Would be suggestive, and again, there's no proof, but it would be suggestive that if there was a significant difference in those two, which you can see how much of a percentage of the total price that they carry, if you looked at mechanical and electrical, that if there was significant difference, another contractor might have been lower than Great Falls. So that just suggests that they likely had similar costs, but I don't know that.
All set, Jess? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jess. Any other questions at this time? Okay, great. And we can come back around, Mark, if by chance Emily or Lisa have the information. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Go ahead.
So this slide again just identifies the general contractor conversations that we've been having, it's that we had, again, everything we've, I think, already mentioned, that we had one subcontractor from electrical and mechanical, both stated they use the same process, and that I guess the other aspect that they did say is that, you know, we could go through the process of identifying reductions, and that takes time on the contractor's side as well as Harriman. They did not suggest that was going to equate to anything of a significant, in terms of millions of dollars of savings. That would be incremental reductions. An example would be looking at the lighting, the light package for the building. We specify multiple fixtures that can be competitively bid, and we maintain a certain quality of those light fixtures. There are other light fixtures on the market that may be lesser quality, that sometimes are targeted in a value engineering. So you can substitute a different light package. You sometimes can save, tens of thousands of dollars in doing that, but changing the light fixtures won't save us a significant amount of money in that. So that's an example. And that certainly would take some time to go through to price a lot of the value engineering options. And so that's, again, a conversation that I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, but that's just some context around the conversation that we had with the general contractor.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
The last one is Longfellow, which because we're under contract with them, and further down, they've given us a more discrete breakdown of cost by phases. And so it's a little difficult in some ways to aggregate this to compare with the others. But this is a Longfellow bid. And what Lisa did research while we were talking about is Warren Mechanical is the mechanical contractor on Longfellow. So there is a significantly less of a mechanical scope of work on Longfellow than there is on Presumpscot. That's the other kind of an important aspect too, because the additions are larger at Presumpscot, there's a lot more new mechanical equipment to heat, ventilate those spaces. And so the additions in the back and the addition in the front are just, there's more mechanical scope.
Okay, Mark. Thank you.
So the next area that we wanted to look at, as the superintendent identified at the beginning in framing the conversation, was what was carried as alternates in the projects. And so first one we looked at is Reiki, where the alternates included upgrade finishes at small group rooms inside of the space, the building on both floors there. Looked at additional natural material, some wood treatments, I think, on those areas, just to warm up the interior of the space. There's also, it says alternate location for pre-K. It should also say additional pre-K classroom. So that price is to fit up a pre-K classroom in the Brickworks area. The Learning Courtyard, which is the outdoor area directly, it's actually at the entrance on the Brackett Street side right now, that will be enclosed into or adjacent to the Brickworks, and the idea was the cost to landscape that significantly, and so that was the alternate for the Learning Courtyard. The next one was to renovate to create a warming kitchen at Reiki, because right now there's nothing to speak of in terms of a kitchen. So and that would be at the front on the Brackett Street side, adjacent to the cafeteria. The next one is to replace hydronic heat piping throughout the classroom side of the school side of the building, and that is a consideration because we're upgrading a lot of the mechanical units, but we're not upgrading the piping. So. And then lastly was the entrance trellis at the entrance. And these are numbers from the contractor now. So we had originally been looking at approximate cost of these alternates, and these are actual costs now for them as included in the bid.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
The next one is the Presumpscot alternates. And so that included new mechanical units to ventilate the classrooms, the unit ventilators in the existing building. Interior doors, so the doors that weren't being replaced as part of new work or reconfiguration that would create uniform doors and new quality doors. With uniform side lights with laminated glass for security. The next one is to renovate the existing hallways. We are not renovating the existing hallways like we did at Lyseth throughout the school. And then lastly, it was creation of those breakout study spaces within the corridors that we called the classroom nodes.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
And finally, the Longfellow alternates included those classroom breakouts, or the corridor breakout spaces, the classroom wing nodes, the interior doors, the unit ventilators to replace those throughout the school, replace some existing exhaust fans. And that scope that, again, was identified originally as important to get done. It was part of the original BFOF scope, but that's why it was carried as an alternate. The next one was the existing masonry repair on the building. And then the last item is the addition of the cafeteria and warming kitchen.
Go ahead, Mark. Thank you.
So in thinking about the options discussion,
before you jump to that, Mark, just quickly, I just want to go to this last alternate, the cafeteria at Longfellow. This is a decrease in the cost from what was originally estimated, right?
I don't have that figure with me, but what it does say is that it's the real number for what that scope is. This was what the contractor priced at the time of the bid.
Mm-hmm.
Anything further, Superintendent? No.
I also will say that this is a construction cost. Originally, when we were looking at the range of costs at the very beginning, as we were trying to set out the scope, we looked at not only the construction cost, but we also looked at the full project cost, which includes that differential of about 25%, oftentimes included for soft costs, for the design fees, for furniture, for permitting, and all that. So in the early part of our conversations back at the very beginning of the project, we looked at not only construction, but project costs. This is construction costs only.
Thank you, Mark.
So the in thinking about what some considerations are, I think in the options, the next slide shows some value engineering, and we'll look at what that was. We presented some of that at the last meeting with the school committee, but this looks at we can either move money to support the Presumpscot bid, so that's one consideration. We could do a portion of the Presumpscot scope of work, and you could make reductions in that through value engineering to free up money to make other improvements to their schools. Or we could reduce a significant amount of the scope at Presumpscot and rebid the project. And so those are, I think, three on the table. I'll go through to the next slide.
Mark, before you do that, we don't have a slide that shows what the overall financial picture looks like at this point with the, so how much money are we, how much money do we need for Presumpscot? How much money do we have? I know we had those slides in the previous presentation. Can you pull that up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Get to that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. Try to do that right now. There we go. So the original budget amounts, this is just a slide. This is not showing the actual construction bids. This was the budgeted amounts. The next slide shows our actual bid amounts and the differences of those. And so here it shows that the total difference right now of the 4 projects, assuming again that we don't adjust anything in the LICEP budget, right now results in a value of about $500,000 of project funds that would not be spent if we went ahead and awarded all 3 bids, or we've already awarded 2 of them. So if we awarded Presumpscot, that's that's what the amount would be relative to our original construction funds.
Superintendent, is that the slide you were looking for? Okay, thank you. Board Member Russell Better.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering, Mark, if you could, because I was wondering about this earlier. I think the other slide, I see you have the actual bid for Lyseth, but do you have, I think the previous slide had for Lyseth with the original and the actual, do you mind bringing that? I think that was on.
Yeah, let me see if that was on that one.
That or chart, yeah. Okay, can you just clarify in that? So that was, yeah, could you just clarify a little bit about what the actual project cost and what the, yeah. Just
yeah, this does not go back to the original BFOF budget amount for Lyseth. We could share that. It takes some time to dig back to find out what that original amount was, but we did, I think everyone recalls that we did shift funds from the overall project reserve at the time to award the Lyseth project, and that was to cover the amount we were over at the time. We also were able to find some value engineering savings and to get that price down. So that was, but what this does is identifies the difference between the bid or the construction cost. The construction costs are right now 14.1 million. The total project costs are 16.8. So that's that difference in the soft cost to the construction cost.
So, and you don't have to give the exact right now, Mark, but it would just help me to know when we're in this situation with Presumpscot building to wrap, I know for me, wrap my head around what did we end up shifting from the reserve for the Lyseth project? Was it about that 2 million, 2 point something? Is that accurate?
I don't want to put a figure out there and be incorrect.
But I don't think that was it. Do you mind if Matthew jumps in? I think
yes, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a little clarity with Aura because there were two things going on with Lyseth. One was Lyseth was in a position of going first, but when you looked at all of the budget numbers from going back to Oak Point and their numbers, they essentially established an earlier construction start date for these projects than what practically was able to happen. And I was the one who made the motion. The suggestion also came to a school board meeting to elaborate on a rebalancing of the budgets based on escalation costs over time, because I was also at the time the one that was pushing for these projects, these 3 remaining projects, to go sooner to try and get better value of what was at the time continually escalating construction costs. So some of the Lyseth money was shifted over based on the rebalancing or rescaling of those escalation numbers over a shorter time domain. And then the other part of the need to shift money to Lyseth was based in the fact that the drainage component, the storm drain component that was a requirement of the Lyseth building permit, was not appropriately shared with Harriman at the time. So they were working blindly to a component of construction that was a requirement of the project and was never in any of their budgets until, I don't know, it might have been past the 11th hour and maybe even the 13th hour. And that was to the tune of $500,000 to get that storm drain work done out in front of Lyman Moore. And that was to go all the way back in the history, was money that came into the money for that storm drain work came into the overall $64 million bond through negotiations with the city council and the school board and school department over reallocating some capital improvements into the $64 million bond. So there was a huge chunk that got shifted over, but that never got properly allocated at bid time.
Very good recollection, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Laura, was that helpful?
Yeah, because I remember little bits of that, Matthew, but thank you for those details about the drainage, and thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So before we go into deep discussions around the options, from now that you've seen all of the slides, are there any questions or things that you need clarification on or further information at this time before we move any further? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to pause for a moment and go over to the people that are waiting in the attendees. And I think one of them was the, she's there anymore? She's not there anymore? Oh, Angela's gone? Okay, I know that she had a question, but they are, oh, there's Angela right there. I want to open it up to allow Angela Taylor to speak. She's the the principal at Presumpscot School. So Angela, I'm going to allow you to speak and ask your question or make, there you go.
I'm going to wait. I'd love to be president, by the way. I'm a little too old. One day a woman will be president. I'm going to wait and hold off until I hear the discussion. I don't feel like I want to add anything yet. Thank you, though.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't have it earlier.
No, it's okay. No worries.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others that are in the attendees list that are on a BLAC that have questions at this time? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to go back over to Ms. Figdor had a question, but then her hand came down, so I don't know if she still has the question or not.
I do, and I'm sorry, I missed that. I realized after you asked if we had any final questions that I still did have a final question, but I was too slow.
Go ahead.
So at the school board meeting last week, we were optimistic that perhaps we would be able to find reductions in the existing bid, like we did on Lyseth when I believe on site and one other area. There was only one bid, and the general contractor was able to get multiple bids, and we were then able to reduce the cost. Am I to conclude that there aren't those opportunities here?
Yeah, Emily, you're right. We were hopeful that perhaps in the conversations with the general contractor, there may be through the review of the schedule of values that would indicate potentially something would come up to say, oh, that's where we could save a significant amount of money, like we did at Lyseth. The contractor that ultimately got the Lyseth project is the one who bid the electrical on the Presumpscot project, and we approached them, and they indicated that there was no delta from their bid to actually do the work. It was and so that option didn't avail itself in this time on either the mechanical or the electrical bids, and those were the two that we were really trying to zero in on. The steel costs we identified as being significantly out of scale with our estimate. We think is largely due to the fact that there has been an abnormally steep increase in steel costs.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Figdor? All set? Okay. I'm going to move to the superintendent.
So I just, I know that I asked Mark to pull up the cost slide, but we were going to walk through the value engineering options and then talk about, the potential problems associated with any value engineering and or postponement of the project. So I think before we move into the discussion, I just want to make sure you have a chance to do that.
Great, thank you very much.
So the list that we presented here is, again, a conservative review of what we might realize for reduction through, and it's right now under the title of value engineering in quotes, because the reality is that some of this would exceed, I think, what would be appropriate under value engineering to essentially remove a significant portion of the building. Actually is going to require some level of redesign. So it essentially what this slide represents is a reduction in scope. So the cafeteria and kitchen addition, or portion of the addition for Presumpscot, is a significant piece that we could remove. And to frame that, we had kind of a conversation that the scopes that we could identify as large areas of segregated scope would be whether or not we replace the portable classrooms. And so that's the majority of the back addition, with the exception of the cafeteria and the warming kitchen. So replacing the portables with new classroom spaces. The cafeteria and warming kitchen is a second scope area we could identify. The front entrance is another scope area that we could identify. And then any renovations to the existing building, the code upgrades to the existing building, are the fourth significant scope. So the first one looks at, okay, we could segregate out the cafeteria and warming kitchen. That's the scope of work we could take off. Likely would save a little more than 1.25 million, but if it were to fall under a value engineering, there's the potential that you never get dollar for dollar in terms of savings on it. So the next one is to remove the front entrance, and so again, that's that other piece of the scope that we identified, and we looked at it on a cost per square foot basis, and so that also would lose the reconfiguration of the lobby and the other spaces at the front of the building. The next one we identified is right now the addition to replace the portables places separate art and music rooms. Currently, they share a space. So if we were to share a space for those specials, we could potentially just eliminate one of them instead of eliminating two of them. So that's taking a room out of the addition. One of the exploration, a lot of the remaining ones are things that we looked at LISEF, and that was to reduce the or type of the masonry, so reduce the cost of the masonry by simplifying it, potentially the size of a brick or the color of the brick, and so that has an mortar color as well. We're not sure what it is, but there's potentially tens of thousands of dollars savings there, not hundreds of thousands. We could change the siding material to a metal siding. We could eliminate the lobby skylight that we've identified to go in the front lobby. We could change the flooring in the new hallways to a standard tile. We could change there's a wood acoustic ceiling right at the cafeteria entrance. We could change that to a standard ceiling. One of the other things that we looked at LISEF was we have a lot of tack surface that goes full height, and we could change some of that tack surface, which is labeled Forbo, to standard tack boards, $3,000 savings. The other one we did was writable wall surface, and right now we have in many of the classroom spaces we have the wall talker, which is a full height writing surface for whiteboards. We could change that out to just standard whiteboards. That's $3,600 estimated. We could eliminate the locks on the casework. It was something that we did at LISEF, and that saved $1,300. We estimate it would save $1,300 here. And the last item was one that we talked about at the tail end of the meeting, and that is if we were to shift funds from the equipment and furnishings budgets, if we add up the funds that are available for that line item across the three schools of Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki, it totals about $2.5 million. If we were to use half of that amount, which still allows us to use some for new equipment, which we know we will need in the building, there's a potential that you could shift some of it and not buy new furniture, reuse existing furniture in several spaces. And so that's a shifting of a line item. We did not do that at Lyseth. There are some unspent funds in the furniture budget to date on Lyseth, but we haven't completed the project yet either.
Superintendent?
So just to be clear, this would not be coming from Presumpscot. This would be coming from the 3 schools.
That's correct.
I have a clarifying question too, just hypothetically. So say the conversation I think that Matthew and Javier brought forward for transparency, and then Jess asked, so if out of the $4 million, we gave, put 1.5 million over to Longfellow to get their cafeteria done, and then the remaining of the 4, which it would be the 2.5 to Presumpscot, we would still have to reduce Presumpscot by 1.5 because of the overage in the bid. Is that correct? And without doing the math, that seems about right in terms of order of magnitude cost, Sarah. Yeah. Math. So then in essence here, if we were to keep the cafeteria and kitchen, it's pretty much, the small stuff at the bottom is piddly. So that's not going to add up to much. So it would be significant. The only other 2 items that would be left would be to remove the front entrance, remove the art or music classroom, which would get us close, not quite there either, but. And at one point, the bottom part, can you talk a little bit about the shift funds from all schools FFE, the 1.1 million there?
Yeah, so every project that we develop a project budget for carries a percentage of the construction costs for furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, the FFE.
Okay, that's what
yeah, that's what that is.
Okay. So it would have to be a combination then of that, potentially the front entrance, and because the other stuff is so small.
What we typically find in a value engineering exercise like this, in order to have these substantial differences or savings in money, you really have to take square footage out of the building. Yes, you can trim some of the quality of different finishes in the building to get the cost down. Like I said, the light fixtures or these items, they typically don't result in substantially large amount of savings until, if you want more than 10% as kind of a round figure that we use, you really have to start reducing the size of the project.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly. I'm going to go to Matthew Winch.
Mark, 2 questions. One is, what's the contingency amount for all 3 schools? And the second is, going back to my earlier question about the mechanical, I was looking through the numbers that Blaine Casey gave you, it's way too much math to add up every single electrical line item. But since you've got the same electrical bidder on Longfellow as you've got as a low bidder at Presumpscot, I'm just curious how close their numbers were to budget on electrical at at Longfellow, as opposed to here. Because that's a electrical contractor that you have a lot of faith in, but there's a huge gap between your estimate and their hard number. And so I'm just curious if there was a similar overage over at Longfellow in their bid there.
Yeah, and Matt, I'm not sure what that is. I haven't evaluated that, so that's something, definitely an exercise we can do to look at. Does it show a similar pattern at Longfellow?
Well, and so I'll get to the reason I'm asking, but if you could look up the contingencies as I'm asking this, it'd be great. So I'm trying to get an understanding in my mind if, because you don't have enough subcontractor bids to really understand if it's the nature of the bidding environment, or if it's the nature of, hey, we're the only ones estimating this, ergo we can throw a number at the wall, and if they accept it, hooray for us. Because but if you feel like the electrical numbers were very competitive and close to your budget on Longfellow, and the same subcontractor who came to the rescue, so to speak, at Lyseth, has what they feel is an aggressive number for Presumpscot, and it's $800,000 over your budget. I'm trying to paint myself a clear picture as to what's driving these numbers.
Right. I guess two things on that, Matt. One, contingency. I assume you mean the project contingencies that we have in place for the 3 schools.
Yes.
Yeah, at 5%. We established a 10% total project contingency on each of those, where we split it 5% to award, potentially for market conditions, for bid, and 5% for construction. And so we've got 5% remaining for construction for the 3 schools, and under the pricing scenarios that or the budget scenarios that we've identified. With that, I'll pause for a minute on the contingency.
So you don't have any bid contingency remaining from each of the 3 schools, even though is the bid contingency at Reiki in there $4 million?
Yeah. So when if I bring back that slide that we identified where we had construction budgets, and then we had with bid contingency showing the total available funds to award, that used that 5%.
Okay.
And so that right now, if we were to look at awarding based on the bids that we've received for all 3 schools, there's still about $500,000 of funds from that available funds to award it, including the 5% bid.
All right. So it is separate. That's what I was looking for. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So with respect to the contractor and whether there was a different competitive environment with the Longfellow electrical bid, I simply don't know that. What we do know is that that the Presumpscot was a single bidder. We didn't investigate to that degree on Longfellow because it was very close to the estimated contract budget.
The electrical, you mean?
Correct. Yeah.
Yep, could you get your estimated electrical number? Because I couldn't find it, and I'll do the math on Lane Casey's 19 numbers here.
We'll see if I can do that while we're doing this.
Sorry to drag this out for everybody.
It's okay.
While you're figuring that out, I didn't know whether or not we should take another question, or if you're trying to. Should we wait a moment? Because I know that Aura has a question, but I just want to hold up to let them do some math here.
And Matt, I just got to do some quick math here because I've got to add on the Division 0 costs.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience for a moment.
$2.13, Matt. Actually, hang on, there's another 3% escalation. 2.19.
Close to adding up all their numbers, but not there yet. But they're seemingly on budget at Longfellow with about No. So when I tally, and I don't know if this includes Blaine Casey's markup or how that's reflected in your budget number, Mark, but there are 1.9 million in electrical costs from, if I got every single number, like I said, there's 25 of them or so. So
yeah, pretty close in terms of how you, not knowing how you might slice it, but 2.19 to, you had 1.9.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, articulate that because I think it's helpful for everybody to understand that. In my view, it's helpful for people to understand that if you've got the same electrical contractor whose numbers are close to budget on Longfellow and they're 800,000 over budget on Presumpscot, then it's an odd anomaly for a 3-week difference or a month difference in bid period to be, that's a huge swing. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Matthew. I know you deal with this day in and day out as well, so I appreciate everybody giving him the opportunity to articulate that. Okay, I'm going to go to Board Member Russell Better.
Thank you. So my question, Mark, was just, and I apologize if I'm repeating anything Ms. Thompson asked, but I just wanted to clarify some further about the FFE, shifting funds from all schools FFE. I'm just not clear. Say that was something we pursued. Is that something that those funds have already been decided in detail for each of the projects? No. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around how, as a DABC, we would, make that like, I guess just to understand what the impact, I guess I'm not clear what the impact would be for those other buildings, So
what we do is we establish that as a percent, and that goes all the way back to the beginning when Oak Point developed the BFOF budgets. There's a percentage we carry for that line item in the total project budget. And typically you would see that expended, a portion of it on equipment. So it may be computer network equipment. It could be computers. It can be that degree of infrastructure on technology. It could be instructional technology improvements that are bought outside of the contract, equipment that you kind of plug into the building. And then the other furniture line items are, so for instance, at Lyseth, we bought furniture for the library because we set that up as new furniture. We did new furniture for the kindergarten wing, new furniture for some of the administration spaces in that new addition, and then there's still some funds available to look at other areas where there's distressed furniture that really needs to be replaced throughout the project or throughout the school.
So just to clarify then, so have those funds, the FFE funds for Lyseth, already all been used? Because I would just, no, okay. I would want to know, so in deciding to do shifting funds from all 4 projects, so would it be, would the 1 to 1.25 million, would that be for all 4 having an equal amount that would be taken off of that pool to be used? Is that right?
Yeah, we'd have to go back and look. We did not evaluate the degree to which funds had been spent at Lyseth and what was remaining for that. Okay,
so I guess I'm just putting out there that, in looking at that, I just would be concerned about that being an equitable distribution. I'm not sure how I feel about that anyway, but just that would be my concern in that one. Just wanted to clarify how that would work. So thank you.
So I'm wondering, Superintendent, can you take a moment and I know you talked about this at the beginning, but outline for everybody in the sense of timing wise, and if we don't have a recommendation this evening to come to the board next week, what that means, because I think that Matthew brought up some good points, as did Board Member Russell Better and others, Can you talk about that a little bit?
There's a next slide that we haven't gotten to yet.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
That.
And Jeff, can your question wait, or would you like to add something right now?
I just wanted to add the FF&E, and Mark can confirm, is not really it's not an option. Meaning you have new space that's going to require new FF&E, and it is part of the design. So eliminating the FF&E would have or lowering the FF&E number will have an impact.
Thank
you. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think they all have an impact some way, one form or the other, unfortunately. Okay, so we'll go ahead with the redesign, rebid, cost considerations slide.
So this is some consideration regarding if we go in the direction of a rebid, a redesign to make a significant modification to the design for Presumpscot, and that's the one that right now hasn't had an executed contract. There would be some effort on our part to redesign it, and so that incurs some cost to do that redesign. There would be the time that it would be required for us to go back and redesign it, and so that's just commensurate with the idea that there's a change in scope and the time that it takes to do that. And then once we have that redesign done, then we would go through the process of re-permitting it. You also have the cost of rebidding it, which can be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And so there's the time element involved in rebidding too. Likely that we will shift out of the construction cycle, academic cycle. Right now, we're kind of trying to align these with academic calendar and also understanding the cycles of construction. But you're going to potentially lose out certainly the sequence of how we plan this. And then the last thing is that there's no sort of guarantee that we'll have any potential value savings from the rebidding it. That traditionally costs may stabilize, but they don't typically go down. And that's just a general statement that it may result in more competitive bidding, or the market could get busier and you may find that you're in the same boat, only you've lost some purchase power because you've lost some time and costs have increased.
But the scope, I mean, the idea here is the scope would be reduced, correct? So
correct.
It would be a smaller scope, and so there would presumably be some potential cost savings. Can I also just, because I think Sarah's, Chair Thompson's question was specifically around if there is no recommendation today. I think, the loss of time for construction on the summer construction season. So, we already knew that we were pushing the envelope with Presumpscot coming in, just before 4th of July. But if we don't have a recommendation, if we don't have, a movement shortly, we will lose this construction season. What's our window for that?
I think we're really, really close to that point right there. We haven't had that conversation with the contractor because they right now aren't clear whether the project's moving forward or not. But it's going to have to be an adjustment to the schedule. The challenge at this point would be to try to get a lot of the earthwork and foundation work done before and the building closed in before cold weather. That's the schedule impact I think it would be up against. And we don't have a lot of time. We have weeks maybe before that becomes a real issue.
And there is a time that goes, in the board acting and then entering into a contract. Like Longfellow, we just signed the contract last week, and that was approved in May.
Correct. Yeah. And if we push into later in the season, and the contractor will ask for funds to provide temporary heat for some of the construction activity. So that would increase the cost beyond what we've received for a bid.
Chair Thompson, did that answer your question sufficiently?
Kind of, sort of. My head's spinning a little bit. Jess Marino? Thank you, Superintendent. I'm trying to process. Jess Marino?
So I don't have a question per se. I'm just wondering, are we entering discussion time, advocacy time, or are we not there yet? Is there more that needs to be presented?
I guess I would defer to the superintendent on that question.
No, I think we are entering that time. I think that we are now at the point where we need deliberation and eventually some form of a motion and a motion and second and action on the part of the ABC to be able to bring something forward to the board, or basically saying you need more time, and then that's why we just talked about the implications of taking additional time. So that's, I think, what we're looking at.
Okay. And we did already open up before to the BLAC members, but there is one that has joined us from Presumpscot, and I want to allow her to ask a question. Right now we're taking any clarifying questions, and we're not into deliberation. So if you would like to ask a question, Laura, you're up.
Sorry, thank you. I had tried chatting back to you, Sarah, but I guess the chat had been disabled.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So I am on the Presumpscot Building Level Advisory Committee, so I understand that my perspective is completely biased. On that last slide, looking at rebidding the Presumpscot job, it looks like if that was the option, we would lose money. We would potentially lose some major pieces to our scope, and it would greatly impact the timeline. Am I reading that slide correctly?
Mark Lee?
Yeah, the idea is that the redesign would be to reduce scope. So you'd eliminate some scope in order to reduce the overall cost of this project. You would reduce some time to accomplish all that, and there'd be a significant amount of time to redesign it, re-permit it, and rebid it, and get it under contract. So there's I think a fairly significant amount of time to do all of that.
Right.
So I think the answer to that is yes. There's some loss of value inherent in the redesign effort, and that it costs time to redesign it. Those funds have to come from somewhere.
Right. So again, I mean, I feel like so many at Presumpscot, especially where we have the modulars, that our teachers and students really do deserve better classroom spaces than what we have already. And the money that was set forth was set for all 4 schools. So while I understand that that may mean other schools may not get their alternate choices, I feel like all schools have already had to make some adjustments to their scope already. And I feel like if we, as Presumpscot, have to go back to the drawing board, we're going to be having to make some considerable decreases in our scope.
Laura, we're not taking advocacy. What you're doing is advocating for. So that's we're asking if you had any questions. So I don't.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's turned into advocacy. And
okay, I'm sorry, I'll stop.
That's okay. That's okay. I feel you, but right now it's just for questions, okay? Do you have any further questions that you'd like to ask?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, any further questions? We're not taking public comment, so I'm not sure. Is Liz LaPierre, are you a BLAC member, I assuming? I don't know who the members are there, so. Take one more. Go ahead, Liz. And again, we're asking questions.
Okay, good evening. I am a BLAC member for Presumpscot School.
Thank you.
And I apologize if these questions have been answered already. I was unable to join right at 6 o'clock. I wasn't able to get on until about 6:45. Is it true that at this point we're looking at not necessarily, other than the shifting of money from the FFE, there's no money to be had elsewhere for designating the construction costs for Presumpscot? For example, with Reiki being under budget, is that factored into Presumpscot being over budget?
Mark, can you please pull back that budget slide to answer Ms. LaPierre's question? The short answer to that, Ms. LaPierre, is that yes, there is additional money, and that is what this slide is going to show.
Is that the right slide? I think I've got the right slide up here. I'm just shifting PowerPoints.
That's the correct slide, yes. So there's about $5 million that Reiki came in under, and so that is also on the table.
I'll just point out to that, Matt, to that point we were making earlier. The third column includes bid contingency available bid funds.
Does that answer your question, Ms. LaPierre? I have to move on to some DABC members. Are you?
Am I still on?
You're still on at the moment. Yes.
So just a quick follow-up question. Just because I don't fully understand the chart, and it might help to just have this brief explanation. So if we were to shift the money from Reiki being under, how much money needs to be allocated to Presumpscot, or how much money needs to be found if there's the push from Reiki to Presumpscot? What's the net?
I think we've covered that, but I know you came in late, but
I'm so sorry.
A very brief synopsis, Superintendent.
That third row, $4,351,000 is what we're short at Presumpscot.
Okay. With moving the money from Reiki?
No, that's how much is necessary for Presumpscot, and we have the money from what was saved at Reiki.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, Liz. Okay, moving into questions from the DABC. Brad Post, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. I think Matthew was first. I don't know what the procedure is, but...
That's okay. I think Matthew will abdicate because you haven't spoken yet, so...
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mark, I just had a question for you. What's your opinion, I guess, if this project was to be set back for redesign, rebidding, and would you say there's a likelihood that we could even enter into a situation where Presumpscot is not able to be finished or started even, because the new bid could be even higher, or there could be an anomaly yet, to be known I just feel like that puts us on a really rocky boat where, we already were put to the end of the process, the last school being funded. We knew there was risk. We knew there was going to be a higher cost. And I really felt we were on shaky ground to begin with, and even the potential to be even more ground next, a scary prospect.
Brad, specifically to I guess answer your question of me, if I had that crystal ball, right? Everyone says, I I might not be doing this for a living, but I guess the short answer is that we're going to lose a redesign. Likely pushes us into a different bid cycle. So the bid cycle is typically contractors traditionally are looking for work late in the year, early in the year. As we get through the year, that they fill up with the work they're doing. That's a traditional cycle that it doesn't always play out because there's work that comes on the market all the time. But with a lot of construction projects, that's sort of a traditional cycle. If we were to put this out, I know that we're already hearing from contractors of continued material escalation costs. So that's something that's real. With the exception, we've heard wood is starting to as I think Jeffrey pointed out, they're starting to level off and come down in cost. But we are hearing a lot of products where there is adjustments to prices. It's highly unlikely we'll see those go down. So likely that the material costs won't subside. The only potential savings may be on the labor side because you're going to hit it at a more competitive time in the market. Right now, we're still seeing a significant amount of construction activity out in the market, and so I don't know if it would get to a point where there's a more competitive bidding climate in the future.
Okay. I don't think you can really answer my question, but
maybe you have the crystal ball, Barrett.
Thank you, though.
All right. Thank you so much. Matthew?
Mark, just quickly, the Great Falls bid was received on July 1st. Do they have a 30-day hold on that number, or is it shorter or greater?
Actually, I believe I think we asked them to hold it longer than that, but I have to go back and look at the terms of the contract. I know that they're.
I believe it was 90 days.
Yeah.
So they've guaranteed their number for 90 days. So that's helpful to know, because if they're guaranteeing their number for 90 days, then obviously 90 days from now, or well, whatever the math is, 90 days from July 1st, puts them square in the winter heating season, and they're agreeing to hold their number to that.
I think that's the way that might play out. I think that's something probably that they were anticipating a sooner start because of what was identified as phasing on the drawings, and so that gets into a little bit more of a nuance on how the schedule might go. But I think in good faith that they put pricing together with the expectation that the project would move to award if it was going to move forward. But that's a conversation that we can look into further.
I just raise it because you're saying we need to rush to a decision, but they're obligated by their bid to hold a number for 90 days.
What I believe I stated is that if we push further through, that we will likely be into winter conditions before if we extend out the decision making to a board.
Right, but you're not hearing me, Mark. If they're guaranteeing their price for 90 days, that could theoretically have them starting on October 1st, which puts them squarely into winter conditions, and they have to guarantee their number at that point because you fulfilled your end of the obligation by awarding the contract in less than 90 days.
I think, again, like I said, man, I think that's something we want to just look at carefully to understand the full range of the contractual documents, and like I said, there's also a phasing plan that's laid out in the documents that said that we want you to start work or we want you to complete certain pieces of work at different phases. There was a scope of work identified for this summer. And so if that is in conflict with the 90-day that says you must hold your price, then I think we just want to understand legally where our ground is so that we're clear with that. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, could you elaborate just for some of us that are not in the industry of exactly when you're talking about the 90-day window and what you're getting at with all that? Can you just elaborate a little bit for some of us?
Well, my overall point is I actually I'm surprised that it's 90 days. I would have thought it was actually 30, but you essentially, when you receive a bid, you're asking a contractor, the general contractor, to hold that number and their subcontractors to hold that number for a time domain of days, so that any processes and decisions and things that need to play out can play out as they need to on a normal sort of pathway. But I'm hearing earlier in the conversation, we have to make this decision. We have to make this decision because there are winter condition implications. And I'm simply asking the question because we're being asked to rush into something where, if the contract stipulates that we have 90 days to award them the contract at no fault to the school district, then there are certain obligations that Great Falls, as the low bid contractor, has accepted in submitting that bid, that they run the risk, if their number doesn't already plan for winter conditions, that they run the risk of owning that. I don't know, to Mark's point, how those schedule anomalies affect that, but common sense would dictate that if your terms, which are 90 days, are longer than your summer construction season, that obviously that's a conflict between the two, and I don't know which takes precedence. I suspect contractually the obligation of the overall number takes precedence, and you have to rework the schedule.
Were you thinking that the number would go down? Is that what I'm asking too?
It's not going to change the number. I'm just saying that I hate feeling like we're being told we need to rush into a decision when the bid has specific language that holds the number for a point of time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Matthew.
But just a point on that is that we need to resolve this issue, not just for Presumpscot, but also for Longfellow and Reiki. And we don't have similar a similar long time horizon on those projects. So I think that we have a lot of evidence that the time is now to make this decision.
Okay.
And to me, it doesn't feel rushed at all. It feels like we got to get to it.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. Jess, Marina?
Mark, remind us what the schedule was supposed to be for summer for Presumpscot. When were we supposed to be breaking ground, and how much is this interfering with that? Do we still have the potential to be on target for breaking ground, even though we're kind of in the midst of this decision making?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. The phasing plan identified the start of phase 1 as being July 8th. And so that right now, we're past that start date. Now, there's still a lot of things that have to happen, but that's allows the contractor to start mobilizing. One of the things we have to do as the first pieces is relocate the modulars. And so those types of pieces would be things that they would be able to start in earnest getting ready to do as part of this phase 1.
And are they kind of on standby waiting for us to make a decision, and they're going to start as soon as we make a decision and the contract is officially awarded? Or are they in the meantime going to start other projects?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think right now they pursued all 3 school projects. And so our assumption is that they really do want to work on this project, if it extends too long, they have staff that they have allocated that would work on this project. They'll have to find other work for them if it extends too long. So that again, just is part of the play. But right now, all indications are that they're waiting to understand which direction. The last conversation I had was that they would follow up with me tomorrow to understand where the conversation went. That there's no further. They want to get going on the project as soon as they would be able to. If it's decided to move forward with the project, it requires that we execute the contract, and at the point of executing the contract, they can start their work.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Board Member Russell Better.
Thank you, Chair. I'm feeling the urgency about moving forward, and I feel ready to make a motion, but I'm happy to give more discussion or context for where I'm coming from. So just wanted to ask you, Chair, what you think at this point.
I think motion is in order. If anyone else, unless anyone else has any more clarifying questions at this time. Okay, so do we have somebody that's going to record the motion, writing it down for us?
Emily is keeping track.
Okay. Thank you, Emily. Okay, go ahead, Aura.
Thank you.
And she'll need a second on the motion. I'm sorry. And Aura will need a second on the motion.
Okay, and is it okay just to give a little context and speak to them?
After it's seconded, yes.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Yep. So I'd like to make a motion that we move forward with the Presumpscot project as designed, and moving the surplus funds from the Reiki project.
Is there a second on the motion? You don't have to
Emily, I'm seconding.
Okay, Emily Figdor seconding. Okay, Aura, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. So I just wanted to share that in being engaged with the for-school bond project for the past 5+ years, I feel like we're in this really fortunate position of having the excess funds available from the Reiki project being under budget. And I feel that the commitment to the equity of all 4 of these projects getting done has been the focus from the start. And I feel that the voters passed the school bond in 2017 with the expectation for all 4 of these projects to be done and done equitably. And I just want to say that I understand the frustration of projects not getting work done that desperately is wanted. And I think all of these projects are really at a basic level of coming into the 21st century. But I really think trusting this years-long process that has involved the building level committees, community meetings, admin being involved, I think our committees have done the work to find what the basic needs are for each of the buildings. And I believe that that's what's important in getting all of our buildings their basic needs met, so that Presumpscot can continue to get what was decided by our community. And moving these funds over, I think, is the way to bring equity to the projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Aura. Does anyone from the DABC have a question for Ms. Russell Better regarding her motion? Ms. Marino?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment regarding her motion, but if that's not the time, I can hold off.
That's okay. So if we don't have any questions, you can go ahead and make a comment. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I also would support moving forward with the project. I know that I'm often on here as a Longfellow community member, but I'm also a staff member at Presumpscot, and I would never support any plan that did not include both the reconfigured front area and the cafeteria. Those are really necessary to this plan. So I would support Aura's motion.
Thank you, Ms. Marino. Would anyone else like to comment on the motion at this time? Okay, Ms. Figdor?
I have an amendment to the motion.
Okay, can we wait for questions on the main motion?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Winch?
Sorry, I thought we were at a question phase. I was more to comment phase.
You can go ahead.
Okay, well, so yeah, I do support shifting money to support Presumpscot, but just so everyone's aware, the dialogue tonight that I've brought forth is because I'm struggling mightily at the fact of seemingly overpaying, not by a small amount, but by an incredible sum for mechanical and electrical work on this school. I think it's of the 4 projects, this one is the one that strikes me as really I tip my hat to Mark and his team. I think it's a great addition for Presumpscot, and I think it's going to be a fantastic building. And I say I struggle with it because I can't think of a scenario in a public forum where you would pay 66% more for a school bus just because, you only had one person bidding on a school bus, or if you were buying 1,000 iPads, you wouldn't spend 66% more on iPads because Apple was the only one that provided a quote on iPads, and they were, and you felt like they were marking something up by such a huge amount. And so fundamentally, I struggle with that. But to see this project move forward, I think it is important, and I'm willing to support it, but would, in doing so, just want to be that person that is just cringing at the fact that we are seemingly overpaying to the tune of $3 million almost for scopes of work that if they were, in total $1 million over budget, I'd, be more comfortable with that. I can take the steel numbers and the site work numbers being as high as they were because they're smaller anomalies, but this is a huge one, and so it is a big struggle for me.
Thank you, Matthew. Before we move to Ms. Figdor on her amendment, are there any questions on the main motion or comments on the main motion? Okay, so seeing none, I'm going to move to Ms. Figdor for her amendment.
I want to say first that I strongly support the main motion. I think it's critical that we move forward with the scope of the project as designed. There's a plane going over my house. I apologize. This is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So anyway, I won't spend time on that, but I'm going to wait for this plane to go by. But I strongly support moving forward with the Presumpscot project as designed. I'll speak to my motion and then ask for a second. And my motion would be to retain $238,000 that is left over after we allot what is needed to Presumpscot. So we still have about $500,000, and my motion is to, of that $500,000 that we still have remaining, to leave $238,000 of it at Reiki to add that pre-K classroom. As folks know, Reiki is one of our largest elementary schools in the district, and yet with this project, we only have a total of 1 pre-K classroom in the entire school. We know that we need to move more in the direction of universal pre-K. We don't have enough pre-K classrooms, and I think it's a real mistake and extremely short-sighted to move forward with this project without 2 pre-K classrooms. And I'll just say that, it was designed as an alternate because money was so tight when we were designing this, and we had to prioritize classroom walls.
Emily, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we didn't get a second on the motion before we go.
I'm sorry, I need a second. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Before we go into advocacy more, is there a second on Emily's motion?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Thanks. And I'll just finish speaking to it in that when we thought that the money to add the classrooms, to add the classroom walls and to deal with the core systems was going to prevent us from being able to really do the appropriate thing here, the minimum, and have 2 pre-K classrooms. So I think it would be really short-sighted, and we will come to really regret it if we don't keep 238,000. And again, there's this is in addition to the money that we'd moved to Presumpscot to add a second pre-K classroom at Reiki.
Thank you, Ms. Figdor. Mr. Norris, you have a question on the amendment? Go ahead.
I do. I guess more of a statement on the amendment itself. I'm all for supporting a pre-K, but I think when we talk about, we mentioned advocacy, that seems to be drifting a little bit outside, to me, the purview of this group, of this committee. I think we're here to make recommendations to the full board. So it feels a little odd that we have a board chair or board person that's sort of making these recommendations that I guess will go up to the Board of Education. But also, we funded Reiki. In my own opinion, this process has not been entirely equitable. And you guys have been vocal in the past about my feelings about how I feel that Harriman has managed this process. I don't think that this money has been managed very well. And I say that as someone who does not have a child in schools, that I'm focusing on the project aspects and the money. So I think on the motion itself, that maybe we not go down that route right now. That, for how we fund universal pre-K, how we fund different programs, I think is part of the board's decision, not necessarily this committee's decision. And I'd like to see whatever we're going to take and a lot to Presumpscot, that we leave that there and we wait and see maybe what's left over and what is needed. Because right now there's a lot of money that we're juggling around. And frankly, I'm frustrated that this group is having to sort of, deal with a lot of cleanup that I didn't anticipate, that I don't think normally that we should have had to do. So these are some tough decisions, and without knowing where we're going and with the track record that we have, I think that if we're going to move the funds, let's move them and keep them there and wait and see if we need them first before we allot any certain amounts to universal pre-K.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. I'm going to go to the superintendent.
Well, a couple things. First, to Mr. Fuller's points, I think this is not to fund universal pre-K.
Mr. Norris, you mean?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Jay has a new last name.
Sorry. It's not to fund universal pre-K. It's to build a classroom that would enable us to have pre-kindergarten at Reiki. This was costed out as an alternate from the project, as Chair Figdor indicated. Also, this cleanup, as you call it, is exactly what this group is entrusted with. It is to help the board make these decisions, to spend the time that you're spending today trying to dive deep into how we got to where we are and help us to sort it out. So that is exactly what this group is charged with doing. Having said all of that, the reason that I had originally raised my hand was to as a sort of a point of order, I guess, or, I'm not 100% sure. It's more in the question than it is in the comment. The urgency for today is to figure out Presumpscot, not to figure out what we do with a 530,000. So I would hate for somebody to be in the situation that they would vote for moving forward with the main motion, but can't do that because it now includes the Reiki piece. So I just want the full DABC to weigh that as you are voting on the amendment to the original motion, that, as you talk about it, that you make it clear whether the addition of this aspect of this amendment is going to influence your ultimate vote, because I think that will help others as they're making their decision to vote.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. That's a very good point. Ms. Marino?
The superintendent was more eloquent than me, but what I was going to say is that I think that $500,000 deserves a lot more discussion. And after this long night talking about Presumpscot, I would definitely support the motion to move forward with Presumpscot, but I would like more time and another meeting where we could look more deeply at those other alternates before rushing to a decision about what to spend with any of that money.
Okay. And I just want to quickly, as I said, I would read Ms. Ray's, Councilor Ray's, and I'm trying to find the email real quickly. I apologize. Just to put it on record, what her email stated. And she said she was just informed by my council calling that there's a DBC meeting this evening. I received no notifications. That's a May. Sorry, wrong one. that was the DABC meeting from May. I'm not finding the email at the moment, so I'll come back to that. I apologize, Belinda.
While you look for that, Sarah, can I just quickly, since you're in that mode of sharing what other members who are not with us generally would like to just let the DABC know that Mr. Stevens also was not going to be able to be here tonight, and had indicated to both Sarah and I that, based on his experience in the field, that he would be supportive of moving forward with whatever needed to happen to advance the Presumpscot project, that he would be very concerned about any delays actually yielding an improved financial outcome. I think some of the same points that Mr. Post made earlier, but just in general that he would be supportive of moving forward with the Presumpscot project.
Thank you, Superintendent. I was going to read his next. Appreciate it.
Give you some time to find.
And I didn't. I'm looking on my phone to try to find Belinda's, but basically what Belinda said was that she wanted to move forward as well. So that in a nutshell. Moving to Matthew Winch, and then we'll come back around.
Thanks, Chair Thompson. So I just wanted to make a clarification to Emily's comments in her secondary motion. She was proposed, so Reiki was 4.844 million under budget. Presumpscot is 4.351 million over budget, plus or minus some loose change. That leaves, if we were to accept the Presumpscot motion, that leaves an overall total of $492,700 from the Reiki underbid. That would, if you added it to the bottom line total, there's about $1.1 million, give or take $1.12 million, that would go to the total bottom line. So, which is overall good news, it would seem, because that still leaves the contingencies, which I'd asked Mark about earlier, intact, because there was a point in time where I was going to suggest we reduce the contingencies, as foolish as that might be. So there's about $1 million that I think, in my view, I would rather address globally, even though, yes, we're in this good position because of the low bid on Reiki, but I think that there are also priorities at Longfellow that could, that an overall discussion of what could be done at Reiki, Longfellow, and potentially even at Presumpscot with this added overage, and whether or not we have discussions about furnishings if we're talking about replacing furniture versus having to buy new furniture for empty classrooms and what have you. I guess I would prefer to save that larger conversation for a later date and just focus on Presumpscot tonight. Although I do support what Emily's getting towards. I would support it, but I just would rather talk about it globally with respect to the other 3 schools at a later date.
Can I, before we move on to Ms. Figdor's comments, can I just ask Mark to verify those numbers that Matt just put on the table, because they did not match my understanding, and I just want to make sure that he's right. I believe that he probably is right, and
I'm taking them from this. I'm doing the math, if I did it correctly, from what I'm seeing on the screen right now, and the budget history and the deltas.
Yeah, and that's where it doesn't match up with my understanding. So I don't know where $1 million came in, because what I see is 521,000.
Yeah, I guess what the table sets out to do is, if we look at the available bid funds.
Yeah, I get it. I'm sorry. Yeah, 500. I do. Yeah. So I walk that back a little bit. I'm sorry, but yeah, 521,916. Sorry. I thought that was what was remaining from unused resources from other locations. Sorry.
It's okay, Matthew. Thank you. And I'm going to move to Ms. Figdor, and then I would like to take a process-wise, take a vote on the amendment and then go back to the main motion that Ms. Russell-Better brought forth. So Ms. Figdor, if you want to make a comment.
I guess I am willing to withdraw my amendment, presuming that we have a longer conversation about how we spend the $500,000. But I do want to just really underscore that this money is coming from the Reiki project. We absolutely want to get Presumpscot done, but the scope of the Reiki project was affected by the cost estimates. And right now we're going to end up with 1 pre-K classroom. And it's really, it's really, I think it's inappropriate. So I am happy to defer this conversation to a later date if we're able to have a fuller conversation at that time. And I guess I'm just going to look to the superintendent to confirm that this body would get together to have that conversation at a, later this summer or in the early fall, whenever is appropriate.
That's absolutely what needs to happen with the remainder is, and one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that in front of you today was all of the alternates, to just put all of that in context. I do just, I think everybody knows this, but if you withdraw that, I don't know who made the second, but whoever that is should agree to
that. Would be Ms. Russell-Better. Would you agree to the better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so looking at the time, and we've had now going at about 2.5 hours. Do you have something you want to add, Ms. Russell-Better, before we go for a vote on the main motion?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, perhaps with the superintendent, but after this vote or decision, some decision being made tonight, and since we don't have a board meeting until August 13th, would the next step be to then have a special meeting sooner so that we don't have to wait another month to then have the board
Yes.
move things forward?
Ms. Thompson and I talked about possible dates today, and I need to verify those with Chair Figdor and then try to get something out to the board.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We would look to move very quickly, ideally this week. So, yes.
Great. Thanks.
Question. Thank you very much. Okay. With that, unless anyone has any more dying questions that you haven't asked tonight. Okay. So what we're going to do this by roll call based on the motion. And Ms. Russell-Better, would you mind just repeating the motion, and then we'll do a roll call vote?
Sure.
Thank you.
I move to move forward with the Presumpscot project as designed, moving the surplus funds from the Reiki project.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to call on you, and if you could just say yay or nay on the motion, I greatly appreciate it. So Board Member Figdor?
Yes.
Jessica Marino?
Yes.
Board Member Russell-Better?
Yes.
Jay Norris? Jay, you're on mute. You gotta unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Matthew Lynch?
Aye.
Okay. Brad Post?
Yes.
Okay. I think that leaves myself. Yay. So that passes with all those present, and it passes. There you go. And we'll move forward to the Board of Public Education. And unless there's something else, Superintendent or Mark from Harriman, that we need to discuss this evening?
No, I think that's all that we need to discuss. Just thank you, everyone, for a long night and, grappling with a lot of, pros and cons. Thank you to the Harriman team for your work in framing up the...
the principal would like to say something now. She's going to close us out tonight. Okay.
Let the president
speak.
Javier, I'm so sorry, but I was going to say that. I just want to say thank you so very much to everyone here and spending this much time tonight making this decision. This means so much to our students and our teachers, and so I just really appreciate all of you. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, President. Okay. So I don't think we need a motion to adjourn, but it is 8:25. And again, as a superintendent, I'll reiterate, thank you so much for taking the time this evening. I know some of you are on vacation in lovely places and taking the time to dial in tonight. And we're very grateful. So thank you so much. And we will let you know next steps. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.